Hey, welcome back, parents. I'm Jordan Langdon, your host for the show. And I just want to tell you that if you are kind of wondering, like, what are the most critical things I need to be doing as a parent in order to prepare my kids to leave the nest, to take their faith with them, to be able to really fully enjoy this life that they were given, you're going to want to tune into this episode. On today's show, we have Andy Reed with us from the Heights School. Andy has been the head of the middle school since 2000. So he has been working closely with middle school boys and their families for over 20 years. Andy is a graduate from Georgetown University, where he majored in philosophy and the pre-medical sciences. He also played on the varsity baseball team for Georgetown. And then Andy completed his graduate work at Johns Hopkins University and holds a master's in school administration. Andy also serves on the board at Families of Character. So I have been personally blessed by his wisdom, his advice, and definitely his support in developing content and serving parents in a way that they can really raise kids of great character. So, Andy has written numerous articles and offers videos and podcasts, especially on topics at the intersection of parenting and education. Andy and his wife, Mary Margaret, have 6 children, 2 sons, and 4 daughters. So, welcome to the show, Andy Reed.
Thank you, Jordan. I want to start by just saying how grateful I am to be on the show, but also to say thank you to you, Jordan, because of all the inspiring work you do for families of character and all the parents who tune in. Just as a board member who sees the behind the scenes, your work is heroic, and I just want to start by thanking you, Jordan.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. You do know the inner workings of our organization. You get the behind the scenes a view of things. So I know that you know what goes into this, and that it's a joy. It's my passion for sure. So Andy, I listened to your talk titled "Family: The Most Formative School" and was very blessed by the content in that talk. So you are exposed to parents and children every day, have been over 20 years, and have your own family experience. So tell us a little bit about what you see that is happening with families and what you've noticed that parents really need these days.
Well, thanks, Jordan. I am fortunate because I get to have conversations with literally hundreds of parents and watch thousands of students grow up. And I work in a school where there's really so many thoughtful parents, parents who are very intentional about the way they're raising their children. So I'm just a beneficiary of all these conversations and seeing what's working and what's not. And so that's what I'll try to relate today, just some perspectives on some of the areas that I think parents who are raising children who are thriving are focusing. So the first is to understand that every home has a culture, that there's a culture at every home. And as parents, we have to be the leaders. We have to shape it. We have to accompany our children through their growth periods. In particular, I work with middle school students. I work at a middle school for boys, and that can be a challenging window of growth for many parents. So I spend a lot of my time encouraging parents and listening to them, telling them that lots of things are normal, right? But the fact is that the ones who are intentional about parenting, that spend time talking to their spouse about the ways they'd like to raise their children, especially early on, there's an opportunity there to do things together. And that culture of the home requires a certain amount of extra effort. And I think that comes through in just the devotion that the parents show who are trying to build that sense of culture. The culture is sort of like the air they breathe. It's what you expect of them, but also what you hold to be true, what you hold to be dear, and you have to hold each other to be dear. That time together when they're young is a special window, and teaching your children that you want them to grow, you want them to remain close. That as you work together as a mom and dad, sometimes you have to be able to say no to some things. And the interesting fact is, I think other than telling your kids, I love you, sometimes you do have to tell them no. That might be the next most important word because you have to be interested in their long-term happiness. What do I mean by that? Well, for starters, I'll just give an example. If you look at your calendar, a family calendar, and ask yourself how many activities are just going to be individual based activities and how many activities are going to be actual family activities. I think we have to create a balance there. We have to create also opportunities for our children to do things that are really thoughtful at home within the family unit, whether it be things like developing music or playing sports together as a family, going on hikes, getting them out in nature. These are so enriching, and to experience things together as a family is a real goal. Whether it be, I think it starts early, starts with reading to your children. That's the first step. I mean, I think every family, in order to have a culture of a home, has to have a culture of reading in the home, and that starts pretty young. There should be books. Have it's okay if the books aren't all perfectly organized, but having them all around the home, that's an important thing. And of course, we could talk for a while about screen time, but screen time is really so often it's the opposite of connectivity. And so maybe we'll get to that later in the talk, but and why it's important to avoid too much screen time. But for now, I just want to say the students who are thriving that I work with and the parents who seem to be happiest are the ones who are growing in virtue. And that takes time, and you grow in virtue as a result of formation. And the formation it's all interpersonal, it's all relational. And so that's so important to have the right amount of time together. So for those of you who have this instinct of we need to spend more time together, I think it's good to listen to that instinct.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Andy. Just the idea that the way we grow in virtue is through our relationships, right? It's not through the to-dos or the check boxes or how well the house is ordered, but it's how we work together as a unified team in order to move the family forward, in order to enjoy those things that you were talking about, like reading and some time to do things in nature, like hiking and that sort of thing. That these are the things that you're noticing that students who are thriving are coming from families where they really prioritize these types of activities in the home, and the relationships become number one.
Right. That's right. And I think that in order to spend time in intentional ways and give extraordinary amount of attention to each other, um, there's a there's a tendency I think lots of parents have these days is to sort of take the frenetic approach. How do I juggle everything? How do I make it all happen? And that sort of promotes in their own children an unsettled mind. Um, the idea that it's how do I get it all done? And at the end of the day, a successful day is I checked every box. And that leads to kind of having five short thoughts at once instead of long thoughts. I mean, this unsettled mind can regularly wear itself out, and parents, have to develop in their own because they can only give what they themselves have. They need to develop the quiet mind, and I'll talk a little bit about what I describe as the quiet mind. But it's the same mind you're going to pray with, but there's lots of foundational habits that families can develop together, and these habits are more contemplative in nature. So the contemplative mind um, is nurtured by, like we mentioned, opportunities to be out in nature. That's really easy. That's something that every human being needs. For our children to be out in nature, it teaches them to see, to appreciate natural beauty. It teaches them to see that the world was made good, right? It's a great confirmation of all the goodness in the world. Um, for to go on a hike with children of any age and have them turn over a leaf and look at the veins, or pick up an acorn and ask why is there a cap there, or just appreciate some of this natural beauty of all the leaves that are changing here where we are. That's an opportunity. And so nature is one of the contemplative patterns that I think's really very easy. Music, beautiful music is another one. Making time for beautiful music, and the next step to that is actually having children develop an interest in musical instruments, and as parents taking a real interest in their instruments and their development as musicians. I I think music is part of the moral formation of our children because naturally there's a beauty and there's a precision to it. There's an order to it, and there's an attentiveness. And I think it's one of the great gifts of being a human being is if you can appreciate beautiful music together. It's so accessible these days, especially reading. We mentioned the importance of reading. This is also a habit that develops a quiet mind. The opposite of these kind of patterns is the mind that goes to screens, and that's the mind of having a hard time with focus. If you compare a screen to a black and white text, they're just completely different things, and the mind will learn to prefer all the imagery being delivered directly to it as opposed to actually actively engaging the mind to develop the imagery, like a good story or a good poem might. So I know it may sound a little old fashioned, but these are the things that we were made for. And to experience them together, it actually helps develop the quiet mind. And I believe that it's our job as parents to teach our children how to pray. The fact is that prayer is hard. Prayer is sometimes hard for kids. Settling down and allowing themselves to actually pray requires practice at other contemplative things. So it's a bit like the foundation, giving them this quiet mind, the foundation. And that means we may have to remove some distractions from their lives. And screens are definitely the biggest distracting, biggest isolating element in children's lives these days.
Thank you for saying that about them being isolating, because I think so often when we have middle schoolers who are turning 12, 13, 14, we think, okay, well, they're going to go off and they're going to be at these schools, or we're going to be away from them, and we get worried about them. So we ought to give them a phone because we want to be connected to them. We want them to be able to connect with us. And then it turns out that they get these phones, and then we notice that it seems that we are losing the relationship with our child to this relationship with this rectangle, like
That's
this
right.
this thing they carry around in their pocket that all of a sudden comes right in front of their face between the two of us. And
Hmm.
then it can go down a bad path quickly in terms of
Right.
that addiction, or preferring that screen over face to face conversation, or maybe even just having to wait for a couple hours to talk with us about something
Mhm.
versus sending a text or something.
I have a good friend who gave his daughters smartphones as a Christmas gift. And he told me that he gave them to his daughters in order to be able to stay connected. And he said there was no more isolating decision when he did that. And it's interesting because his goal was to be able to communicate with his daughters, but it actually pulled them in a lot of directions that kept them from being able to participate as much in the family. So I think we have to understand too, phones are different than when we use the word phone, right? What we're really talking about these days is a computer, right? And it's a computer that can take kids anywhere, to any. So we would never give them, if they were in the city, we never give them a Metro card and say, well, stop off at any stop. The fact is that there's a problem with trust, in my opinion, of the content of what's out there, but also, I think even if the content is perfectly fine, I think it trains the mind away from relating to actual human beings, to each other. It actually distracts the mind from what is real. And developing these contemplative patterns, developing the quiet mind, the ability to be still, to actually be still with your own thoughts. I think that the screen time, ultimately, one of the biggest challenges is it's training us and training our patterns of thought. And we don't want to do that. Children are very fragile. The plasticity of their minds are such that if we deliver them screen media constantly, then that will be the way that their mind will go. That will be the way their mind prefers. If you think of a person who's scrolling through the internet, um, they're looking for entertainment. They're looking for something that's fulfilling, and there's no natural limit to that. There's no point at which they get tired. The same is true with video games, right? When it comes to video games, You could go play soccer for 2 hours, 3 hours. You're going to get tired at some point, right? You
Yes.
could play video games for 10 hours and never be tired. And then there's really never a fulfilling moment um, when it comes to gaming. And so these are things that we have to realize that we were made a certain way. And we have these new influences that are very new. And for thousands of years, kids found other ways to entertain themselves, and usually it involved playing together. And I think there's been a real drop in that. And also, I think there's a real drop in actually family conversation that comes from screens. So just not. I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but I definitely want to make sure that parents understand that there's a difference now between the way that we were raised, and we have to recognize that when we have that degree of screen time, it doesn't lead to happiness usually.
Mm,
The way relationships can develop up in a real and a sincere way, and those relationships, the primary relationships in our children's lives, are the family's relationships. And so, for those of you who say, "Well, he or she needs to stay connected, and we need to give my son or daughter a smartphone," I'd say wait as long as you can, because I think that's in direct competition to the influences and the relationships that we have as a family.
mm. Which makes sense why the title of that talk that I listened to was Family, the Most Formative School. Because you're
Mhm.
saying these relationships that we're developing with our kids within the walls of our own homes are really the most important relationships for them to have going forward. And so that intentional time that we spend with them, which may only be 1 or 2 solid hours, after school activities and things like that per day, that we really are mindful about the way we spend that time together
Mhm.
and
That's
form
right.
them.
That's right. And the distracted approach that we all have a tendency towards as parents, myself included, and the distractibility that our children have um, as a result of these screens, it's a very real challenge to family life. So, making sure that that time together counts, making sure that we put away our screens. Um, I think there's been a great loss of culture of the home as a result of this. And it's not to say we can't recapture that, because the great news is that parents and children, we need this. It's written into our hearts that we need family. Parents all fundamentally understand that their children need them. From when you first held your child in your arms, it was a great moment of incredible hope and optimism. You thought about the rest of their life. You thought about how they were reliant on you from the start. There's uh, there's a there's a special understanding that every parent has that they are ultimately the primary shaper, the primary educator of their children. And so, in order to do that, we need intentional time together, undistracted time, time where it's just enough to be together, to have conversations. I guess what I'd say to every parent is, when do your children know that they can talk to you? Is there a moment throughout the day, and even if it's right before bed? And I know that's hard. Getting children to bed is not easy, but that window of time when they want to talk, making sure that we are actually available, and knowing many parents. I know one dad who never wanted to get a dog, but agreed to getting the dog if each night the deal was that one of his children, at least one, would go for a walk with him to walk the dog as well. So there's these routines we need to build into our lives, whether it be family dinner, which I know it's a lot to pull that off, but parents are heroic, and there's certain patterns that we just can't give up, and certain patterns, and we have to start small. It doesn't all have to be perfect. Let's not make that mistake. That perfect is often the enemy of the good when it comes to parenting.
Yes, one of the sweet examples that you gave in that talk that I remember is that you had a baby on your hip and you were making dinner, and Mary Margaret was bringing the kids home from like their band practice or whatever, and then your son had come to you with this artwork from school and he wanted to show it to you, and And at first you were kind of like, yeah, yeah, that's good. That looks good. Right? Because you have a baby on your hip and you're trying to cook the dinner and get
Right.
everything on the table for everyone to come home. But then what happened for you? Um, share with us, like, what kind of triggered you to do something different to really attend to him?
Well, it's funny. I realized I was giving a talk on this very topic after I kind of blew him off. So I turned off the stove and I had a seat. And this was my son John Paul, who's now older, but back when he was little, and kind of had a seat down on the kitchen floor with him, and talked about this painting that he had done, to the point where he was no longer interested in it. Even how long can you actually focus on something together? So making that time, I think sometimes. If we think about the patterns of our own mind, if we're trying to focus on the actual, to give an extraordinary amount of attention to those under our roof, our family members, those we love in a very special way. Sometimes the goal is, we think about filling our children up, right? What can we give our children? Um, and you think about, say, for instance, 3 glasses of water on the counter. If you take the spigot of the sink and you turn it on and you just try to basically spray them and fill them up, there's a lot wasted there. But if you take each one and give each one its due time, that's that's, I think, the parents who are able to do that, whether it be working with your children while you're doing some yard work, or incorporating them into the dinner, or even into efforts on the dishes. I know many parents who, that's the time when they can talk with their children as they're doing something. Often, middle school boys, they don't really want to talk, most of the day, but then there's certain moments when they know that they can. It's good to have a little bit of a distraction while you're talking, whether it be doing the dishes or shooting hoops, playing catch, going for a walk. That's when a lot of our young adolescents tend to want to talk, when there's a slight distraction. And
Yes.
you have to build those patterns before high school, before the world opens up to such a big space, before they have their driver's license, before they go off to college. It happens so fast. They grow up
Yes.
so fast. So how do we make the time for each other now? And we have to, again, realize that we're not always going to be successful. I have a story, if you want, Jordan. I'll tell you a story about some parents that I feel like really illustrate this point.
Yes, please. We'd love to
Okay.
hear about the successful ones.
Well, it's interesting because the story actually is, the way it turns out. It starts by, I'm a young school administrator, and I notice there's just one family, and I'm just so impressed by their children. And I had an opportunity to talk to both parents who came to visit my office, and it's good to talk, by the way, to school administrators and teachers, not just when there's problems. It's good just to build that relationship. So I invited them to come in and talk, and I wanted to learn everything I could from them. And I said, it's working out so well with your children. Tell me what would be your advice that you would give other parents? And they looked at each other and they kind of laughed because, of course, they know more than what's external, right, to their family life. The externals are, there's always more to every story and every family, right? And I've never met the perfect parents, but they laughed. And then mom said, I guess the advice I'd give is, um, each night I pray for each one of my children, and as part of an evening prayer, that she sort of examines her day, and I pray for each one. And they had 8 children, so they had a lot of moving parts, a lot of things going on. And she said, and then I asked myself, did I give that child what that child needed today? And often the answer was no. Um, and the dad says, yeah, she's tough on herself sometimes. And she said, she went on to say, well, I asked my oldest daughter once, when she was a little bit older, was there ever a time when you needed me and I wasn't there for you? Or is there ever a time when maybe I could have been more present to you? And because I was so busy with lots of things, that I just wasn't aware. And she said, oh, no, no, mom. But then she asked again. She said, oh, really, I want to know. And the fact is, we all know, if you have an oldest daughter, they're the ones who really know what's going on in the home. And so she asked her daughter, I really want you to be very sincere. And she said, well, Mom, there were times probably when maybe you were too busy, and there were times when maybe I could have benefited from talking to you. Um, and I should have maybe initiated them myself, but I didn't always do that. But Mom, every one of us, we always knew it was your deepest desire to be close to us.
Mm,
And and so that's all she needed to hear, because the truth is that what I realized when I'm listening to this story is that parenting is not about perfect success. It's about faithfulness to the mission. What our children really need to know is what that we're devoted to them. We don't have to be perfect about it, and we won't be. But the idea that faithfulness is more important than success, that parenting is not something you do and that all of a sudden you get the perfect outcome. Human beings, we don't grow in straight lines. There's ups, there's downs. But when our children know that they're our priority, that being close to them, informing them, and helping give them the things that are eternal are our priority, um, that knowledge, that's what they really need, right?
mm,
So, to those of you who are parents out there who constantly see things through the lens of what you don't have or what you haven't given your children, or who can be too tough on yourselves, it's important to remember that our children, what they really remember is what we hope for them, what we hope to
mm.
give them. So,
So true. It reminds me of that saying that when you're with a person, they may not remember the words that you said to them, but they will remember the feeling they had when they were with you. And I think that goes a long way in the way of parenting too, is that, if we orient ourselves to this mission of togetherness
mhm,
and we have this vision for our family that we want to be there for each other, we want to have each other's backs. We want to spend time really developing this contemplative spirit and this contemplative mind where we can rest, where we can think deeply about things, where we can pick up a book and enjoy it and let our imagination run wild from the pages of these books that we read. If we have that in our mind as this foundation for family living, I think kids are so forgiving. I know that kids are so forgiving for the little things that we, mess up, or the times that we, are impatient with them when they want to share something with us. It's that underlying culture of the family that you talk about that lasts,
that's
right?
right.
That's worth developing long before their, senior year and they're ready to leave the nest. Is there time to go back and make repairs and say, "Oh, I missed out on this. I wish we could have done this different." And I apologize for that. Yes. But the earlier you can start doing this as a family and saying no to the culture, some of these temptations of screens and these sort of mindless things that put us into distraction, the better it's going to be
That's
for
right.
everyone.
That's right. And the last thing I'd say about the culture of the family is that it really starts with the relationship between a husband and a wife. And that love and that devotion there, that's what informs our children more than anything else. And sometimes as parents, we think about what can we give our children? And the most important thing we can give our children is actually devotion to our spouse. So sometimes the most important thing for any child to actually know is that daddy loves mommy very much, and that mommy loves daddy very much. That is the foundation of so much of what we give our children. And so I'd say keep your eye on that ball. Even if you can't, even if the children are headed in every different direction, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of all the details. Never ever lose sight of the importance of your spouse, because together together you can do this. Working together, that devotion is what's going to inform your children the most.
And I will just underscore that the importance of elevating your marital relationship even above that relationship with your children. so that your kids
Mm.
see that this is this is the unit that started our family. They
Right.
loved and cared for us so much before we were even born that they were willing to bring us into this world and take on this whole kind of craziness of family life. And so for us to continue to demonstrate that we love each other, that we are for each other, we're friends in marriage, even after
Hmm.
20 years or 25 years or 7 years, is so important. As a therapist for 20 years, I would say that that relationship is the most important for the child's well being. If they have doubts about how mom and dad care for each other, or the how secure that relationship is with their parents, if they have doubts about that relationship, their anxiety is very high. They
Mm.
live with this undercurrent of anxiety that interrupts their ability to learn. It interrupts their ability to form healthy relationships with other children because of the unsteadiness in the primary relationship that they came from. And so,
Right.
if you're listening to this and you're going, oh, I don't know that we're giving him the best example of a loving marriage, you have time to change that.
Hmm.
There's time to work on your relationship and make it, as soon as today, a priority in your home, even in small ways. So,
Yep.
Andy, I know you talked about, asking that one family, like, what is it that you're doing that your kids are turning out in such beautiful ways? One of the things I asked a family when I was young and just started out having children, and was, what are you doing to, you seem so in love. You have these kids crawling all over you in mass, and but the two of you sit beside each other and you have these big smiles on your face. Like, how do you keep the romance in your relationship when you've got so much chaos going on with kids of different ages? And
Hmm.
they just said, we are each other's first priority.
Hmm.
Like,
That's right. That's right. And I think that what that comes from is sometimes we think about our relationships of those who we love the most in our family. And we think about it from a standpoint, well, how do I be patient with my children? Or how do I be patient with my spouse? And we have that can only take us so far. I mean, that's what I think most people are asking for is just, can you give me some more patience?
yes.
Um, but really, we need something that takes us 10 steps further than patience. It's optimism. It's that sense of hope. That's where do we get that optimism and that source of hope? That hope and that optimism, we have to understand that as families, we need each other, right? It's written into our hearts to love each other. It's not that it's always going to be perfect, and you will have to start small with any of these patterns. It's okay to start small. It's okay just to start by telling your spouse you love them and giving out more hugs. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's the goal is to try to smile at your children more. Make sure that your spouse knows that you're happy to see them when you come through the door. But to start small, there's great optimism. There's great optimism because your family raising your children, you're not doing it alone. You're doing this together, but there's lots of grace involved. And so trying to be open to that grace as a family and that optimism and that source of hope. That's probably the most important advice I could give a parent is try to be open to the optimism that we receive from grace.
Mm. Optimism. It's so important for us. That was just the message at church this morning, actually, was just having confidence that
Right,
this family is going to work out and these kids are going to be okay and that our relationship is okay and that we have to just be persistent
right.
in praying for our kids and our spouse,
That's right.
and just developing these small habits at home that help form them in the ways that are going to make a difference when they leave the nest. Right, Andy, you
That's
talked
right.
about this contemplative mind versus the um, unsettled mind.
Mhm.
And one of my biggest anxieties as a parent, when I think about my kids leaving home, which our oldest will be leaving home in 3 days, is that he have this developed this sort of interior life where he finds joy in rest and finds
Mhm.
joy in non-screen based activities, and will on his own initiate opening up a book or taking a nap on a Sunday, or going out and taking a drive to see something beautiful out in nature on his own. And
Right.
so, I love that you gave us some simple strategies at home for just um, helping to develop kids in that contemplative way of thinking about the world.
Mhm.
One of
Well,
the
thank
things I
you.
noticed was that you said, all the books don't have to be organized on the shelf, right? And I
Right.
think,
Right.
as mothers
Yeah.
who appreciate like a beautiful home and we want things to look a certain way, I glanced around my living room before I came in here and I thought, it was sort of a mistake, but I left this homeschool poetry book out in the living room a couple weeks ago. And we had this huge snowstorm. We got like 23 inches of snow, and the kids went outside and played in it for a while, but they got tired out and they came in, and I bumped into this poetry book, and I just laid on my back on the carpet on the floor and opened it up, and I was reading through it and looking through it. And then all of a sudden my kids came in the living room and I said, "Remember when we used to read from this a couple years ago when we were doing homeschooling?" They were like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that poem. Let's open up and do that again." And so we ended up spending like 20 minutes reading poetry to each other and laughing and just using different voices to get into it. And I thought, I'm so glad I left the book out, that I didn't worry about tucking it away perfectly on a shelf somewhere, but that it caught my eye and that we were in a position where we were able to just welcome that into our schedule and enjoy it. But it's just those little things.
That's right. Those little moments, and it's interesting. It reminds me of a story. My wife, Mary Margaret, told me the other day. She had a younger mom over just to talk about, some of the patterns of motherhood, and the younger mother came over, and we had just had everybody had come home and visited. Some of our children are older, some are in college, some are we go all the way down to age 9, and she looked around the house, and the mom said, "Thank you for not cleaning up your home for me." She actually she came in because she has lots of children, and she said, "I needed to see that sometimes things aren't in perfect order, and um, but what really matters is that we're giving a short amount of attention to each other, not just to the things in our lives." So I would make sure that that example that I want to highlight to you, Jordan, that example that you just described of reading poetry with your children, that doesn't happen if we have screens involved. Um, that's really at that moment. That moment is easily interrupted by screens, by just one of your family members on a screen. So I think it's good to be kind of disciplined about their use, the intentional use of screens. That would be just a point that we hear it so much, and it's gotten to the point where it's kind of a widely accepted reality. But as families, it's so hard to change some of these patterns. Um, but making time for each other, those contemplative patterns are going to develop together. They're actually going to develop. I think the easiest starting point would be a hike. While we still have some good weather here, a hike would be a great thing. To read together is a great idea. Music. Please involve music, beautiful music in your children's lives. Help them to really hear things, and it's great when they actually can develop an interest in their own music. When they actually develop an interest in actually playing an instrument, that's a participation in creating something beautiful. Art's another one. Um, you know, Making time to go to an art gallery or to actually to appreciate art in some form or create art. There are elements of our mind that we just don't seem to use enough. And we need to do that together as a family to develop the quiet patterns, the contemplative patterns that might lead our children to have that peace that every child deserves to have, that opportunity to pray that every child needs to be able to have. So,
Yes, thank you. And I was just thinking of different rooms in the house and areas of the home that you could sort of convert in really small, simple ways in order to make those activities more accessible to your kids versus their screens. So if you can start by limiting screen time and saying, well, we put all screens away when it's time for dinner for the whole rest of the night. And then you have a table that's out, maybe in your living room, somewhere close to the kitchen, and you have a puzzle on the table. That is something front and center that they can see that is a different choice, right? And so I know personally as a mom, anybody that's visited my house in the past probably 5 years has probably gone, this is a little uncomfortable because things are just, you know, neat and tidy and in their spot. And does anyone really live here? But what I'm getting used to is like, you know what, there's beautiful ways of still maintaining a nice home and a comfortable home, but also that is functional for your kids to participate in the arts. You can do a bucket of colored pencils with, butcher paper out on a table, and that just being out and available for them is such a good choice. Even middle schoolers and teenagers love to doodle and draw, and for them to have something immediately available in their main space of living is such a better option than going down the rabbit hole of a phone or a tablet or a computer screen. And Andy, you
Mhm.
talked about how the the satisfaction of screens is just really so minimal compared to the satisfaction of reading or observing something outside in nature. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about that, the difference between kind of how the brain receives those two different mediums?
Sure. Well, for starters, I think if you were to just compare the two, and I mentioned a black and white, non-moving text, right, in a screen, you're going to learn the screen is effortless, and you could look at your children's eyes when they're looking at a TV, I mean, or a screen or a phone, and you see their eyes are not quite fully alive, right? There's something there that's in them that because it's all being presented to them. But compare that to having to create something in their mind, right? That's a more active endeavor to create the storyline as you're reading or as you're reading a poem, thinking about what the author is saying. Um, that's a pattern, and I'd love to see one of the healthiest things in little children is to see imaginative play games when they have their stuffed animals or their dolls and they've actually developed their own personalities and their own names, and we've seen this in a lot of children, and just that's a construction, that's a building, as opposed to everything already done on the screen for them. So one is more engaging of the actual will. Even playing outside requires a will. I mean, it requires exercise is so healthy for children. Being outside, going for a hike, they're taking things in and they're thinking about it. They're being trained to really to see. And natural beauty is an easy one. When we turn over our children to screens, it trains them to see nothing other than what's being presented to them. So we're really turning our parenting over to the screen. Um, the phones are surrogate parents. They're now all of a sudden going to be the uh, the source of information, the source of, let's call it, truth. About the source of what matters in the world, and I don't think we want to do that. For our children, we want to be the primary source of truth for them. They need that. They need that perspective. So the relationships too that we offer them through experiencing these contemplative patterns together, I think it's what families need more than anything else. And it might even not be a screen. It might be the fact that we have every child playing on two soccer teams, and then it becomes a logistical challenge of just getting people in different directions. It might be that we don't have a time each weekend to be together. I mean, if you look at each weekend, that's that's time where there should be something reserved, and it doesn't have to be an extraordinary activity. I think that's a mistake lots of parents make. It just has to be an extraordinary level of attention to each other. So that time together, undistracted time together as a family. If you look at throughout history, um, I think we're at a minimum right now when we talk about undistracted time together. And we need to actively take steps, every family, to actually improve in this area. And you do that with the help and support of your spouse. So maybe if you're listening to this and your husband is not, or you're listening to this and your wife is not, it would be a great thing to have them listen to some of these themes. That's one of the reasons why I know, Jordan, you do all this hard work, is to have couples benefit, parents benefit from this. And it's important that that maybe a podcast like this, that they actually can share it together. The value of that is huge, to be on the same page, because let's face it, sometimes it's just hard to make changes in our family's patterns. But as parent leaders, we can do that.
Yes, thank you for encouraging that. The sharing of these podcast episodes with your spouse, maybe even sharing the earbuds as you go on a walk at night. You have one, I have the other. We put the podcast episode on, we listen to it, and then have a conversation about it, right? Incorporating it into something we're already doing so that we can just make it a little bit easier to have some of these conversations and make some of these changes. Well, Andy, I certainly appreciate you coming on the show. It's so wonderful to hear from someone who has such extensive experience working with families and middle school boys and understanding what works best, because it gets overwhelming sometimes as parents out here in this culture, and you can feel like you're really swimming upstream and you're saying no to a lot of the things that other parents are saying yes to, and you could feel that you're depriving your child of something by not giving them a cell phone or a screen. But your message today really helps to affirm our decisions to, just take it up from the status quo parenting and marriage that our culture offers, and to really do the meaningful work to form our kids in the home in even just small ways and small changes that are reasonable on a day to day basis. So, thank you, Andy, for
That's right.
being here with us.
Well, thank
And
you, Jordan.
yes, we hope you will share this episode with people in your corner. And, Andy, where could they find more of this content and your podcasts and talks? Is that the Heights Forum podcast?
Yes, so heightsforum.org is actually a site. Our school has over 400 podcasts, articles, parent lectures available for everyone who's interested, every parent out there or educator. We put these online for free, and it's an opportunity just to share ideas about parenting and the culture of the home and the culture of schools. So feel free to join us anytime on the heightsforum.org.
Heightsforum.org. And Andy, if there are parents that are going, wait, my kid's school needs to hear from Andy. Are you traveling and do you do presentations or workshops for schools? Is that something that a school could reach out and ask for you to come and give a talk there?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. And I also want to say, partner with your schools to be as intentional as possible. Some of the things we talked about are it's excellent when you can have the culture of your home confirmed by the culture of your school. So your teachers and your children's lives, talk to them about some of the patterns that you're hoping to develop in your children. Don't be shy about talking to them about some of the aspirations you have for their growth and development and what you're trying to do at home, because you'll find that educators, by and large, they got into education in order to help you raise your children, and so that's the ideal. So don't be shy about talking to the educators in your children's life about some of these same things we discussed today.
Wonderful advice. If they could have the same sort of foundation at school as they do at home, what a blessing that would be. I know you are serving that up at the Heights there in Maryland. So keep up the great work, Andy, and thanks again for joining us. And guys, I'll catch you on another episode of the Families of Character show real soon. Take care.
Thank you, George.